ever consumed healthcare in America or on another planet or another country on planet Earth. How does it feel? Feels great. It amazes me over and over and over again when we get into this that we, being the thing that's being made on the factory floor of healthcare across it, that we don't exist there. That we live in a supply-side economic where the things that are built and are mediated are for the hospitals or for the clinics or for the networks. And that there's very little ability for us to consume healthcare across the boundaries. And these boundaries are everywhere. These boundaries are EHR systems, these boundaries are economic systems, and the inability for that to flow through takes what should be our most high reliable systems, our health, and we have unbelievably low reliable systems in healthcare. So 50% of healthcare referrals fall apart, never get done, right? So over and over and over and over and over again we see this, that these systems are built to look inwards rather than outwards and across these boundaries. So one of my mentors in this world who studied lean manufacturing in Japan in the 1980s and helped bring it to the United States has beat this into my head. So over and over and over again, maximum value is created at the boundaries. That's what we do, right? We find these boundaries and we tunnel through these boundaries, and when we can do that, we can release a tremendous amount of value for everybody involved. So how many people in this room has Ken kind of pulled by ear or whispered in the corner or quietly talked to get involved in this community or another standards-based community? I know I'm one of them. So in the story of the railroad, and we talk about the Trans-Continental Railroad, I'm going to jump into that here really quickly, we find a incredibly similar historical example of how standards opened up what was the golden age of manufacturing and industry in America. So this is Ken here at the bottom. Anybody know Theodore Judah? If you don't, you need to look him up. Of the railroad gods, and gods with a small g, he's my favorite. So he was a railroad engineer who somewhat quietly, and nobody knew he was leading the whole thing, and this is typical with Ken, as you don't know Ken is the leader because he's always standing in the back and ushering everybody forward. Theodore Judah recognized the unbelievable importance of driving a railroad across the country. It took 6 months at that time to go from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco. 6 months. Mr. Judah made the trip, I think it was 12 times through the Panama Canal. Finally, he would end up and over the Sierra Nevadas and was able to figure out finally what the pathway is that he could take the thing across. And he was the evangelist and the engineer that made it happen. Unfortunately, he died in the jungles of Panama from cholera, so we hope that doesn't happen to Ken. But if it does, Ken, right, it was a good cause. Yeah. Right?
If I do get cholera, the care won't be coordinated.
No, it won't be coordinated. Exactly. So why is this a similar story for healthcare in terms of where we're at? So pre-standard track, across the nation, there were up to 40 different track sizes. These track sizes were built, and you could only run a specific type of railroad car with the width and the height of the tracks, were seen as a business advantage to the individuals who owned those railroads, right? If you wanted to get into Boston, there was only one track size in Boston. You had to unload everything at the outside of Boston onto a new train and bring it into. It's incredibly similar where we're at with the EHR and the other business systems here in healthcare today. Proprietary, the data's held on the inside, don't allow for it to interact across. So what's the problem with that, right? It's unsafe, right? We crash as human beings, we get lost in the cracks, and we talked initially about the first use case to develop around with Dr. Hasley, and it was Jane, right? Jane being a 27-year-old tech CEO from San Francisco whose business is going great, which means she's flying all over the country, but she's also pregnant. Jane's got pre-diabetes, she's got early depression. Jane should be able to walk into any healthcare center in the country and they should fulfill her healthcare needs. God forbid, could you imagine what that would feel like? If you showed up and you were actually the customer, and how can we help you here today, right? We have it flipped around. And because of that, we crash. We have horrible things that happen all the time. We get lost in the cracks. And then the other one I think is even more interesting in the lower left there. This is 3 different railroad track sizes with locomotives pulled up next to each other with a group of people, human beings, who are offloading from one railroad to the other one. These are our care coordinators in healthcare here today. And everybody who sits in the space in between, right? Who log on to a zillion different systems, pull down the faxes, pull all the information together and try to shove it into a different vehicle to allow it to move forward. It also should indicate to some degree who we should be building systems for, right? Number one, it's for us as the patient as we flow through. But also it isn't, and we focus a lot, and I'm a doctor, we focus a lot on the doctor and what the doctors need, right? We need to be focusing on this orchestration layer of healthcare as well. So of the amount of time that we spend on our healthcare, very little of it is in front of the doctor. Very little of it is about really intensive decisions, right? So we think that the thing that's going to make healthcare better is to get that tricorder from Star Trek, and you just kind of roll it over you and say, it's your appendix, sir, right? It's very rare that there are diagnostic challenges in healthcare. Those parts are relatively easy. The hard part is coordinating everything across and making sure that things don't fall through. So we have to really begin to focus on who are we building these systems for, who are the primary users, and to me, it's about the theory of constraints. And if you don't know the theory of constraints, and I would assume that most people in this room do, study the theory of constraints. And that's where process management in healthcare really needs to be placed. Identify the constraint, elevate the constraint, find the next constraint, and let things flow. So what then happened, and this is, when Ken was telling me about OMG initially and trying to get me to fly to Chicago that morning, which I still can't believe I did, Ken, you're incredible. One of the things he said to me, he said, this isn't just a standards body. He said, this is where business comes out of, right? This is where great things are built between companies that can shift industries. I've spent time working in a startup and tried to push against the elephant in that regard. And it's really difficult to do, but when you sit in the room with the number of brilliant people that you have here today, but also the organizations that you represent, and if we can actually come together to make this a reality across the nation, to have this be the standard for delivery of healthcare between and within healthcare institutions, I think that we're going to see a similar economic impact that we saw from the Trans-Continental Railroad, the initial one. So 1863, the act is passed, requires the standard track within America. Inside of 10 years, this is no accident, that was the Industrial Revolution. All of a sudden, you could mill a part in San Francisco and ship it to Boston to be a part of somebody else's thing because it was economically feasible to do it. So if you look at the inventions that came out in the decade afterwards, just the names. Joseph Glidden, barbed wire. Goodyear invents the shoe welt stitcher, right, initially. Alexander Graham Bell, Otto, Edison, up and down the line, there was this massive era of innovation in industry. And for those of you who've spent time in academic medical centers in different places, you know that there's all this pent-up innovation. Everybody's got 3 good ideas. But nobody has any idea necessarily how to bring these things to market over time. So if we can do this, and when we do this, I think what we're going to see is not just what happens with automation, which it makes things better, faster, cheaper, and feels better, but you're going to see this massive outgrowth of innovation in impactful health IT across the country that should really help drive across the world. So Ken nailed this early on, which is now is the time, right? And sure it is, right? I mean, we've sat in a room like this, all of us, with a room full of well-meaning geeks, which that's not pejorative, I'm one of you, right? And we say to ourselves that if we just band together, we can change things. And we've tried this many times before in healthcare. And why is now different, right? Three big reasons. Number one, and it amazes me that we don't talk about this as frequently, is that healthcare is being disrupted by the cloud. As we speak, major healthcare organizations and institutions across the world are transitioning all of their data into the cloud away from client servers. When you do that, those natural barriers and boundaries fall. The ability to get into that market and to restructure how information flows through there all of a sudden changes markedly. And it also changes clearly the equation for the EHR vendors, which, to some degree have, espoused the cloud and interoperability for all these years. But with this cloud movement is the perfect time to disrupt. And the second one is Dr. Hasley. Right? We all say to ourselves, like, well, if we bring out standards-based automation and we can deliver best practices in this regard, everybody's going to love it, right? But the question always comes down to, that's great, but who's going to pay for it, right? Just because you bring this thing out, who's actually going to pay anything for it? And over the last year, I think that's the most exciting thing that's happened, is Steve has done that. He's taken these models, he's taken this language, he's got 1,000 eyeballs in the community right now. Doctors of all people have actually accepted this and are paying to use it. That market validation is huge, right? And we need to build off of that going forth. And then, as Steve talked about, was value-based care, right? All of a sudden, these traditional boundaries where, healthcare was built and health IT was built in a time when there was money falling from the sky and you needed these big rakes that were EHRs that pulled all the money into you, right? That's gone, right? It is now about delivering care across and over boundaries. It's now about making sure that everybody's safe and preventive care happening over time, and we're going to get paid in that way. It's the perfect time to crash through these boundaries. There's nothing in that one. Let's go out here. So, what is the call to action? So, it is sea to shining sea. This is a spike that I pulled off the railroad at the top of my street, painted it gold myself. This is for Theodore Judah, and it's given to you, Ken. So by this time next year, and hopefully by HIMSS next year, we see in the market, right? I'm not talking about in demos, I'm not talking about in rooms like this, but I'm talking in the market across the country, in every zip code in America, we demonstrate the success of BPM Plus and process automation across this nation. So Ken, that's to you. And I want to see that come back and hand that off next year, and we start this community. And we start revenue flowing through it, and we make this a reality. So, there you go, Ken.
Careful trying to fly with that.
Yeah, it's a little challenging.
I got a story for that.
Yeah, I got stopped again. Yeah. That's it, Ken. It's yours. So you have to make that a reality. We all got to help you do that.
I think it's a great, it's a great challenge, and I look forward to being able to be creative awarder of this, and the Sean McNamee, don't call them memorials.
Theodore Judah. It's Judah. I'll be lost to history.
So, we made it. It's been a long day. Thank you all for sticking it out. One of the things I often look at these one-day events is what the attrition rate is. And often you see a pretty good peel out around lunchtime. And we've got, I don't think that happened. I mean, we've lost a few, but most of you are still here. And I think that's a testament to the speakers throughout the day. So we can give a round of applause to everyone. Special shout out to Robert for all of his efforts in coordinating this into May. In terms of there was a small but pretty intense group back in the corner in the kind of business development or how do you business case discussion. And one of the things that I think was really exciting that came out of that is the idea of picking, I think we kind of settled on 2 cross-disciplinary use cases and trying to get some professional societies together to collaborate, not just within one, but across societies around specific conditions that meet some immediate pain points. So let's look where we have some bad outcomes and pick some specific things that we can demonstrate some real value around. And the ASEP has put their hand up to facilitate among the societies to help make that happen. So shout out to them for that. That's awesome. There are huge opportunities to get involved in this, and kind of carrying the gauntlet that I think Shane was threw down. We are in the process of forming a formal community of practice tethered to the OMG around this. So the idea of this community is it's a place for us to collectively mature the style guide work that Robert has been spearheading and that we've had many contributors to, and figure out, okay, how do we create artifacts that are in a position that they can be shared? And how do we create an environment so that we have standard rail gauge, so vendors and healthcare institutions can take these things and ingest them without having to learn 400 different languages or having to offload one training to the next. And I think the idea of the community is a couple of fold. One is it's to settle in on what that gauge looks like and to adapt that over time. I think that's one goal of the community. It's not going to be a standards body. We still are affiliated to the OMG. If standards work needs to happen, we'll do it on that side of the fence. But this will really be a practitioners community. So how do we take people from each of your organizations that are doing modeling? We've got folks here from various walks, so whether it's MITRE or DOD or PA or pick your particular clinical specialty, my hope is that each of you will be working on models, and this will be a place where you can come together and say, well, how did you guys solve this learning problem? Well, we have. Okay, well, how are you approaching it? Well, this is what we're doing. Well, we're doing something different. Well, can we come to an agreement? And let's put that agreement into the style guide. And if you can't agree, so be it. It goes on the to-do list, and maybe we need a little more practical experience. So we want that. So the intent is we've got some chartering documents together. Everyone who attended, you'll get a short survey after the event. You want to hear about today. We'll make sure that it's got links to all the presentations and all that stuff. So, and the style, the field guide. So you'll have access to all that stuff. We'll get that out next week. But really, this is en route to building this community. So come September, when we're back together, my hope is that we have a couple of use cases to talk about, and if we had bumps in the road getting there, let's figure that out and work through those. So I think, I promise you what we've done isn't perfect, but I think it's good enough, and we can do an awful lot with good enough, because we're not doing good enough now. So thank you all for attending. The last word today, I'd like to pass the microphone back to Ben. So we're not for Red Hat. This event really wouldn't have been possible. So thank you to Red Hat for sponsoring today. And we'll give you the last word.
You're welcome. So happy to be here. I just want to say, when you leave here, right? Hopefully there's a sense of community here and collaboration. Overall, I think there's a lot to be accomplished, and we need everyone in this room to be involved for it to happen, right? There's just no way to, one part of this can support such an endeavor, right? There's got to be a lot of different legs to this table. What I ask is when you go home and speak to your colleagues, ask them what their strategy is for patient safety. What is their strategy for process automation? What is their strategy for semantic interoperability? Right? Ask them those questions and see what they say. I mean, you have an answer, right? You were here today. You know what the answer is, but a lot of times, I don't think people are trying to solve those things. They just assume that they're not solvable. And it's important that the message that we have here is broadcast outside of this room. And that in that way, this community will grow. And the more people that are involved, the faster we will accelerate in our efforts. And that's one more thing I'd like to add. It was really wonderful to hear from Dr. Heisler today about what he's doing with a build out with a startup. That sort of agile mentality is how this will accelerate even more, right? We have to remove fear of failure from our activity if we're going to get anywhere. So thank you for that. And with that, that's really all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Tonight is the OMG event reception. All of you are encouraged and welcome to join. When does that start? 6. Starts at 6, right out here in the hallway. I think most of the folks here will be around and we can have kind of informal conversations